church and the other ministries today may be excused. My lesson today that Bill gave out was, the title was Making Decisions, Learning from Pharaoh's Choices, which I believe there are two types of people we can learn from. Those that teach us what to do, and then there's those that teach us what not to do. And sometimes I think those that teach us what not to do hits a nerve and sinks in a little bit more. It seems to stick with us. Nobody likes an embarrassing moment, right? That's when it really hits. You heard the old saying, a wise man learns from his mistakes. I had a former pastor who used to say, a wise man learns from mistakes, but a wiser man learns from someone else's. So hopefully that's what we can do here today is on Pharaoh's decision-making, not only just his decision-making, but what he had with a hardened heart, as the scriptures say. Which raises a common question. Did Pharaoh lose his choice of free will? Did God not just give him a fair chance? I'm sure many of you could probably answer that question, but I'm going to ask it later on at the end and see if you have the same answer. Our first thought would be yes, because of the following verses. Exodus 4:21. Yeah, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Oh, I guess I jumped to the very last there, but yeah. The Lord said to Moses, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders I have given you the power to do, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let his people go. Exodus 9, verse 16 says, but I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might show you my power, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. You will set yourself against my people, and I will not let them go. And then in Romans 9:17, Paul elaborates, follows up by saying, for the scripture says to Pharaoh, I raised you up for this very purpose, that I might display my power in you, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. Therefore, God has mercy on whom he wants to have mercy. He hardens whom he wants to harden. One of you will say to me, then why does God still blame us? For who resists his will? And I kind of want to echo that last of verse 19. One of you will say to me, then why does God still blame us? For who resists his will? To further examine that, I think the first thing we need to do is define heart, which is not easy. To me, it's not easy, because I'm going to give my disclaimer right now. I'm not proclaiming to be a cardiologist, a doctor, a love therapist with a radio show, psychologist, and definitely not a preacher. And matter of fact, the one quality that probably exempts me from this is just my human side, because if we read Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? And then follow up with 1 Samuel 6:17. The Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So, the heart is there's also another entity here, and that's the mind. Is the mind and heart the same thing? There is no Hebrew word for mind, just heart. And of course, the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, specifically Exodus, where this all comes from. The heart commonly refers to the mind as the center of thinking and reasoning, like we see in Proverbs 3:3. Let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck and write them on the tablet of your heart. But it also includes the emotions, like Proverbs 15, chapter 15, verse 15. All the days of the oppressed are wretched, but the cheerful heart has a continual feast. And the will, and thus the inner being. The Hebrew word for heart is leb, which we would, the way we pronounce it would be L-E-B. Or there's another, you'll see another word similar to it is lebeb. Proverbs 23:7 says, "For as he thinks in his heart, so he is." Deuteronomy 6:5 says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and all your mind." However, Jesus repeats that same verse in Matthew 22:37 when he's talking about the rich ruler. He says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and all your mind." Now we have a separation here, which the reason why I use Greek is because Greek is the basic word for or is the basic language at that time where we get the New Testament. The Greek word for heart is recognized as cardia. It represents the core of a person's inner being, the seat of emotions, desires, will, and volition. The word for mind that's used in Greek is dianoia. And that relates to the intellect, the reasoning, and understanding. What we're normally in our language used to as being the mind. So I think what we all can agree is that the heart kind of dictates the deeper desires, often considered the spiritual center, more of the emotion side, right? What we like, what we dislike. The mind processes information and forms thoughts. So think of the mind as above your heart. So now that leads us, now we've got that crossed out. It leads us to the next question. What is a hardened heart? From what we have read and discussed, is not God's will. It's usually not using logic, right? In this case, with Pharaoh, God's will was he wanted the Israelites freed, right? And journey back to the land of Canaan, which was known at that time. Because he had a covenant to fulfill with Abraham and Jacob and their descendants. And I would have to say God does not promote slavery. However, Pharaoh refused to let the Israelites go because he felt like the Israelites were too of a valuable commodity, being their slaves. So, is a hardened heart something that changes us, or is it actually our true colors coming out? This is where we need to delve into the scriptures to see if Pharaoh had any chance to change his heart and make good decisions. That is, thinking logically and be able to make the choice and fulfill God's will. We can follow this up with 3 points. The first one comes, and this is outside of our reading, is Exodus 8:15, where it says, "But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said." And there's a similar verse. He did it the same thing again in Exodus 8:32. But this time, also Pharaoh hardened his heart and would not let the people go. So, to me, that brings up an interesting question. Maybe to you too. So, if Pharaoh could harden his own heart, what's stopping him from unhardening it? Does this mean he just has an on switch? Is there no off? Everything's got an off switch, right? I mean, at least you can pull the plug. Anything you have electronic? Which leads to the second question that perplexes me. Why did God harden his heart not just one time, but several? And you can see, I'm not going to give the verses all, but there's several times. We have Exodus 7:14, Exodus 8:32, Exodus 9:12, Exodus 9:19, 20:20, and so on. I mean, we're looking at 8. Why so many? It seems like there was one for every plague that he gave. So it seems to me that it was kind of going back and forth. The second point I'd like to make, which refers to in Exodus 10:1, which was part of our reading. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may perform these miraculous signs of mine among them." Now notice, he hardened Pharaoh's heart, but that's not the only one he hardened. He also hardened the officials. Now why would he do that? Why just isn't Pharaoh the focus here? Isn't he the one that God was supposed to make an example of to show his power? But why would he add the officials? Which, let's jump down to Exodus 10:7, which was part of our reading as well. Pharaoh's officials said to him, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go, so that they may worship the Lord their God. Do you not realize that Egypt is ruined?" So we have a comparison there. We have two sets of people, Pharaoh and the officials, that God hardened both their hearts. And now we can compare. Do they come up with the same answer? No. Matter of fact, to me, it seems like that the officials are using reasoning. They're saying, hey, let's look at the greater welfare of Egypt. We're not just keeping our own our own ambitions in mind. We're looking at everything. Well, Pharaoh, the only thing he had was pride. It's like, it almost feels like he was giving in, that if he let them go. Also, maybe was the Israelites that much of a use to being their slaves that it was not worth giving up to let Egypt being destroyed? So was Pharaoh making these errant decisions because God hardened his heart, or was his true colors coming out? In our men's Bible study, we had studied a book called The Man in the Mirror. It was by Patrick Moreling. He quotes an individual named Dr. Henry Brandt, who's listed as an educator, counselor, author, conference speaker. He has a BA in psychology, sociology, and an MA in clinical psychology. He also had a doctorates as well. But his comment was, and he quoted him, "Other people don't create your spirit, they only reveal it." Morley follows up by saying, "Continue with, when my feelings get hurt and anger begins its predictable rise inside me, I have to confess that other person isn't making me angry. They only reveal my anger. That was already there, lurking just below the surface of my conscious thoughts." So, I believe Pharaoh had an ego to begin with. Pharaohs at that time and a lot of kings thought they were gods. The people saw them as gods. Look at the Roman emperors. They had a role to live up. And even in chapter 10, verse 3, we go back to, "So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, say. How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me?'" That right there tells me he has pride. He's just not willing to give in. Especially when he says in Exodus 5:5 earlier, Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Again, that sounds like an arrogant statement, even before he had his heart hardened. I've read Vernon McGee had a commentary where he says, he describes the hardening of the heart as like a heart being squeezed. It's like being induced or pushed. from its natural makeup. It doesn't change. It's more like a litmus test. And there I go again about true colors. You know what a litmus test does? It tells us if there's acid in the vicinity, and it'll show a different color. So the way I see it in that reading there, the counselors were able to make a rational, logical decision after having their hearts hardened while stopping Pharaoh, while Pharaoh still had a pride issue. And then the third point I'd like to make, and that's just the plain Pharaoh had officials. He had advisors. He had people he listened to. He had people he put there that he should be able to trust. Did he follow what they said? Did they give good advice? I think so. I mean, look what happened in the end. He still refused. It got worse. People were killed. Then he chased after them and lost his whole army. I don't think that was the better thing for Egypt as a whole. Another passage we can learn from is 1 Kings 12. In 1 Kings 12, it's about 1 through 13. There is an individual named Rehoboam. I'm sure that's not a real familiar name, but his dad was pretty popular. His dad was King Solomon. And this was the time when King Solomon had died and Rehoboam was taking over Israel. The people of Israel had come to him and they said, "Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you." So Rehoboam had to think about it. He went to his elders, the elders that served his father. And they said, "If today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servant." That sounds like good advice to me. Matter of fact, what do you think Jesus? I think Jesus would approve that. Matter of fact, he even said, "I came to serve, not to be served," as he was washing his disciples' feet. However, it didn't seem like Rehoboam bought into that. So he had to ask his buddies, the guys he grew up with, young men, as the scripture says, "These people have said to you," this is what they said, "These people have said to you, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter. Now tell them, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions." Now, does that sound like good advice? I was coming from, considering your dad was the wisest guy known to man, you'd think you'd have a little scruples on your head. However, guess the decision he decided to make. He decided to go with his buddies. And the result wasn't good. Because of it, we're talking politics 101 now. Because of it, the people of Israel didn't like it. So they turned up against him with a man named Jeroboam, who was prophesied to be the new ruler, and which now split the nation of Israel into two nations, Israel and Judah. Because at least his clan, or his, of Judah, stayed, and some of the Benjamites stayed with them. But he even got worse by sending a representative, and they stoned him. And he barely made it out alive. So even Solomon had some question, obviously, about his judgment, because in Ecclesiastes 2:18, verse 19, it says, "Because I must leave it to the man who will come after me, and who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool." And obviously he didn't listen to his dad when he quoted Proverbs 15:1. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Yeah, I wouldn't take the phrase, I will scourge you with scorpions, too welcoming with open arms. So, the place I work at, there's 3 of us that have about an equal standing. We all have about the same amount of years. Where we got was maybe a little different paths. But what I do is there's sometimes I make decisions where it may affect the company. And it could cost us money. It could cost me my job. So I have to use some really good reasoning. So what I usually do, if I'm only like 75% or 100% sure, not sure on making that decision, I'll go to the other one of them. And if he agrees or if he says what I was thinking, then hey, I'm good. But if he doesn't, then I go to the other one. And if he agrees with what I said, then I'm feeling a lot better. However, that doesn't always work either. And usually sometimes what he says agrees with the first guy. And that's what I go with. I throw my ego out the door, because if you do, and if you follow what Pharoah did, you'll wind up in the bottom, in his case, wind up in the bottom of the Red Sea. So, after high school, I didn't know what I really wanted to do. I knew I wanted to get a 4-year degree, because that's what a lot of my family did. But what I wanted to do with it, or what I wanted to major in it, I wasn't sure. And that was part of the reason why I picked Ohio State, because they had a lot to choose from. My first summer after high school, my first job was in a factory. And it was a learning curve. It didn't really go with me or stick with me, especially I was an outdoors kid. I didn't like being stuck in a hot factory, and I felt it was monotonous work to me. I wanted something a little bit different. And as a matter of fact, there was a guy who was working as a laborer there for a while, and he said he had a 4-year degree. I can't remember what it was, but I was like, well, you're not using it. What was the sense of taking it or doing it if you're not going to? It seems like to me it was a waste of money. So it was there then I realized that, and people told me, it was like, you got to do something you like. It's like the number one thing. However, you're making the biggest decision in your life that will affect you the rest of your life. So if that doesn't put pressure on you. But my thought was, if you can't do anything with it, what good is it? So to me, it was just as much as if I like it and I can't use it, then there ain't much use to it. And I want to use the skills that God gave me. So while at the Ohio State University, we called it the Ohio State University back then. Now I think, what is it, the Ohio State University? We knew how to pronunciate. I had narrowed my major down to 2 choices. And I was trying to make that perfect decision. That's when my counselor stepped in and said, and this is something I lived by for the last 35 years. Don't worry about making that perfect decision. Just make good decisions. It was like, it kind of hit me. I was like, that's so simple, but yet profound. It puts the pressure off of you trying to make that perfect decision. But in the long run, if you make a good decision, a lot of times you'll find out that it is a perfect decision, or the next decision leads to that perfect decision, which it did in my case. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Huh. Oh, here we go. All right, so what does Jesus say about this? Let's look at Mark 8, verses 14 through 21. And I always like, this is a little bit commentary between him and his disciples. I always thought it was a little bit humorous, kind of like a Keystone Cops type, back and forth. Okay, 14. Verse 14, the disciples had forgotten to bring bread, except for one loaf they had with them in the boat. Be careful, Jesus warned them. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. They discussed this with one another and said, it is because we have no bread. Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked them, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see, and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember when I broke the 5 loaves of the 5,000, and how many baskets of pieces did you pick up? 12, they replied. And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 7,000, how many baskets of pieces did you pick up? They answered, 7. He said to them, do you still not understand? To me, there, Jesus is reasoning. The disciples are focused on something else. Bread. Think about it. How much bread do you need to carry with you? How are you going to, these guys traveled quite a bit on foot. They jumped in boats, back and forth. What's the sense of all that? And Jesus reminds them, did we have a problem the last time when we had the 5,000? Well, no, there was plenty to go around. And what about the other time with the 4,000? Yeah, there was enough there too. So what's the problem? These guys are more focused on bread while Jesus is trying to teach them about the Pharisees and what they can do. So, what is God's will? How do we go about discovering it? Hopefully by using logic, reasoning, wisdom. There's a whole book on it, right? Proverbs, Ecclesiastics. Also prayer. C.S. Lewis in the Abolition of Man said, and because our approvals and disapprovals are thus recognitions of objective value or responses to an objective order, therefore emotional states can be in harmony with reason when we feel liking for what we ought to be approved, or out of harmony with reason when we perceive that liking is due but cannot feel it. No emotion is in itself a judgment. In that sense, all emotions and sentiments are illogical, but they can be reasonable or unreasonable as they conform to the reason or fail to conform. The heart never takes the place of the head, but it can and should obey it. I'd like to repeat that last phrase. The heart never takes the place of the head, but it can and should obey it. Which I always like C.S. Lewis, and to me that's saying a lot from a guy who wrote a lot of stories on fantasy worlds about a talking lion and talking animals. But yet he's really down to earth and makes the point clear. Well, actually, I read that whole book, and that was the only, of all that whole part, that was the only part I really understood, which helped out here, right? So, bottom line is, we need to see what God's will, and that could be, what is God's will? That can be a whole nother message in itself. But we need to touch our hearts. We need to do what we think is right, which goes again, I'm going to ask the question. I ask again, did Pharaoh lose his choice of free will? You think about that. I'd like to close in prayer. Thank you, Lord, for having this opportunity to share, and intent listeners. Please help us when we try to make decisions what's best for you, what you want us to do, and give us that insight. Whether it's making medical decisions for our health, for what do we want to do with our life, on moving forward with our career, picking the right person to marry, what you see fit. In your name I pray, amen.